limbs, and a thick mist gradually filled the alley. When the first roll of thunder crackled, Meredith saw Stephen suddenly lift his head. His blue eyes widened, and he screamed. He was lost to Meredith with a quick pump of his skinny, pale legs. Greg barreled through the mud in pursuit. Meredith pressed herself against one of the walls as she heard Stephen let out a defeated wail. Thunder and rain muffled the sound of what had to be the two bodies slamming into the mud. Meredith listened, then moved down the alleyway, stepping only on the raised platforms, careful not to let her rain-soaked sneakers mire her in the mud. She came to the edge of the final tomb and braced herself against it with one hand. Fear had brought a sheen of sweat to her skin. For a panicked moment, she thought the others might have disappeared. She peered around the edge of the tomb. Stephen's bare leg jutted from beneath Greg's waist. Mud plastered the hem of his khaki shorts to his pale thighs. Greg looked as if he had been struck in the back. His body collapsed onto Stephen's. His soaked hair draped the right half of Stephen's face. At first it made no sense. Only when Greg lifted his head could Meredith detect that Greg was rocking slowly back and forth on top of Stephen. The panic she had felt only seconds earlier turned from an icy knot inside her chest to a hot rush like the onset of nausea. Her first thought was that one of them had been hurt, but some instinct wouldn't allow her to believe this, so she remained unable to call out to them. She watched Greg lower his face over Stephen and watched Stephen's blue eyes widen as the tip of Greg's nose grazed his. Greg and Stephen locked eyes with an intensity that told Meredith they were part of a world she had been denied access to. It had to be a world known only to boys. Then a guttural war cry startled her and sent her backward against the mausoleum wall. It forced Greg and Stephen apart as if a shotgun had been slid between their waists. Brandon had made it to home base. The first bolt of lightning struck several blocks away from the cemetery. It sounded like the snap of a giant guitar string and bathed the padlocked cast-iron gate in a brief flash of white light. Meredith screamed, one hand flying to her mouth. She backed into Stephen and then stepped away from him. They all stared at the gate. "We can jump it," Brandon barked. "Not with our bikes. How would we get them over?" Greg asked. "And what about the last person? If we stood on each other's—" Thunder ripped across the charcoal sky in deafening crackles. "Then the last person wouldn't have anyone to stand on." Stephen was speaking through the thunder, his voice high-pitched with reasonableness. Meredith pivoted away from the arguing boys. She looked up at the bifurcated edges of the clouds as they passed over the skyline of stone Virgin Marys and angels. Were the clouds really as close to the earth as they seemed? Stephen heard her first sob. Furious, Brandon hurled his bike into a nearby mausoleum. He sank to his knees next to it and then glared at the other three as if to challenge them to contradict his anger. But Stephen had already slid one arm around Meredith's shoulder. She went rigid beneath it, ashamed. "Oh my God, Mare," Brandon sneered. Lightning struck again, this time closer. "Get away from the gate, it's metal," Greg barked. "Fuck!" Brandon yelled before rising to his feet and charging the padlocked fence. He landed against it with both hands, grabbing the tines and shaking them. "Come on." Stephen's voice was low with authority. Meredith raised her head. It took her a moment to realize he was walking her back into the cemetery, to where the dripping branches of the oak tree over the fireman's tomb were rocking in the wind, driven by torrents of rain whipping through the alleyways. "Where you going?" Greg yelled. "Come on," Stephen called back over his shoulder. Stephen propped Meredith against the oak's trunk. Greg approached them tentatively, shooting glances over his shoulder at Brandon, who lagged further behind, his fists shoved into his pockets. The rain had soaked through Brandon's t-shirt, revealing hints of muscles developing across his shoulders. Meredith saw how Greg's arms looked broader beneath the soaked sleeves of his polo shirt. When Meredith looked at Stephen, she realized how pale his skin was, how delicately his limbs connected to his frame. "My dad taught me this thing," Stephen trailed off. Brandon stopped. Meredith, Greg, and Brandon had pieced together the story of Stephen's father from snippets of overheard conversation and cryptic remarks from their own parents. The three of them sometimes talked about it when Stephen was out of earshot.